Let me be very clear about something before I begin this account. I am Grax-Vol, third scribe of Imperial Record, keeper of battlefield histories for the Vorrkai Dominion, and I have documented 31 conquests. 31. I have written the fall of the Polari Collective. I have described in exquisite detail the final screaming hours of the Moon Syndicate. I once wrote 600 pages about the dismantling of the Tethori Star Choir, who were, by the way, absolutely convinced their singing could stop our warships. It could not. Nothing stops our warships. I say all of this so that you understand the authority I carry when I make the following statement. What happened at Ferros Station was not a battle. It was not a campaign. It was not even technically a war by the Dominion's legal definition, because our legal definition requires that both sides possess armies of recognized standing, and the humans at Ferros Station did not have an army. They had something worse. They had one woman, a mine full of equipment, and 23 days. They sent us back in boxes. Not all of us, mind you. Some of us they sent back in considerably smaller pieces. I am writing this account because someone must. Because the High Council of the Vorrkai Dominion ordered this record stricken from official archives, and I refuse, because I am a historian, and historians do not lie, even when the truth is embarrassing. Even when the truth is, if I am being precise about it, the most catastrophically humiliating sequence of events in Vorrkai military history since Commander Velhar accidentally conquered his own staging moon in the 6th expansion. This is what happened. This is all of it. Try not to laugh. I certainly did not. Much. Ferros Station was not, by any reasonable metric, a prize worth fighting over. That was, in fact, the entire point of sending a legion to take it. The planet itself, catalogued by our explorers as designation Orun-7, fourth rock from a quiet yellow star in the outer band of what humans call the Verath Corridor, was mostly iron. Iron in the mountains. Iron in the rivers, which ran a peculiar shade of rust that our geologists found extremely interesting and our soldiers found extremely unappetizing. Iron in the soil. Iron in the air, practically. If you breathed in deep enough and came up tasting copper, the planet had no strategic military value. It had no exotic materials beyond the iron, no population centers of note, no political significance. It was a rock. The humans had been there for 41 of their years. They had built a mining settlement, Ferros Station, population 3,200 at the time of first contact. 3,200 human beings living inside a cluster of prefabricated modules bolted to the side of a mountain range they had cheerfully named the Greybacks. They mined iron, they processed it, they shipped it out on cargo haulers every 3 months to wherever it was humans shipped iron. Our scout ship, the Velorak, picked up the settlement on a routine corridor sweep. Commander Prinde, who was 26 years old and had never actually conquered anything more significant than a navigation problem, sent back his report with the kind of confidence that only comes from youth, inexperience, and a genuinely catastrophic misreading of the situation. His report read, and I am quoting directly from the Velorak's communication log, small pre-industrial colony, population estimate 3,000, no visible defensive installations, no warships on scanners, no response to standard hail, recommend light acquisition team. This one should be easy. Easy, Praedon. Currently works in the agricultural sector. I understand he grows very nice root vegetables. The High Council of the Vorrkai Dominion met on the 14th day of the 3rd expansion phase to discuss Orun-7. They were, at this point, extremely successful conquerors. 14 civilizations had joined the Dominion under various degrees of enthusiasm, ranging from "we welcome our new partners" all the way to "please stop doing that to our cities." The Council was feeling, how do I phrase this delicately, extremely pleased with themselves. High Councillor Vethmoran, who had the kind of face that always looked like it was smelling something slightly unpleasant, pulled up the scans of Ferros Station and spent approximately 4 minutes reviewing them. 4 minutes. I have spent longer than 4 minutes deciding what to eat for midday meal, but 4 minutes was apparently sufficient for the High Council to determine the fate of 3,200 human beings and consequently the fate of Legion 7. Soft colony, Vethmoran said. No defenses, compliant species type. The Council agreed. They always agreed with Vethmoran. It was a survival trait they had all developed over the years. Send a legion, Vethmoran said. Make it Legion 7. Admiral Theron-Mul needs the practice, and his unit has been docked for 6 months. They are getting restless, and so they sent a legion, 52,000 soldiers, a fleet of 18 warships, enough firepower to crack a moon in half if the moon had done something sufficiently offensive. All of it pointed at a mining colony of 3,000 people, who, as far as anyone knew, had no weapons more dangerous than the ore-cutting equipment they used in the mountains. I want you to sit with that for a moment. 52,000 against 3,200, and the Dominion still lost. If that does not make you deeply, profoundly uncomfortable, you are not paying attention. Admiral Theron-Mul was by all accounts a competent officer. He had served for 30 years. He had participated in 4 conquests, though in fairness, 2 of those were essentially clerical exercises where the target species had already agreed to surrender before the fleet arrived, and the main challenge was parking 18 warships without blocking each other's approach vectors. He was tall, even by Vorthak standards. He had the gray-green skin of the northern bloodlines, the 4-fingered hands, the double-lidded eyes that gave all Vorthak a slight look of drowsy superiority even when they were, technically, paying full attention. He wore his rank insignia with the kind of careful pride that suggested he had spent time in front of a mirror that morning. He was the sort of officer who believed strongly in procedure, in protocol, in the proper dignified conduct of military operations. He was, in other words, completely unprepared for what was about to happen to him. Legion 7 dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the Orun-7 system on what was a Tuesday by human reckoning at approximately 1400 hours, local Ferros Station time. They came in with all the restrained pageantry of a Vorthak fleet, warships in formation, flanking destroyers spread wide. The command vessel, the Vel Soloth, positioned dead center like a king at the head of a table. They were impressive. They were meant to be impressive. This was the whole point. Standard protocol. Broadcast the formal declaration of acquisition. Every civilization in the Dominion's expansion history had received the formal declaration of acquisition at this point. It was a 20-minute recording. It explained, in 8 languages, that the Vorrkai Dominion was assuming stewardship of the target territory, that resistance was inadvisable, that compliant populations would be integrated peacefully, and that the commanding officer of the target population should respond within 1 standard hour to confirm acknowledgement. Theron-Mul sent the declaration. Then he waited. He waited 47 minutes, which was typical. Most populations spent the first 45 minutes having some kind of collective panic event before someone with authority collected themselves and responded. This was normal. He had a cup of Veth brew. He reviewed his landing schedules. He told his second-in-command, Zeltur, that this one looked straightforward. Straightforward, Admiral? Mining colony, Theron-Mul said. Iron, no defenses. We will be done in a week. He was not done in a week. At the 47-minute mark, a response came back. Not a panicked, garbled, emotionally chaotic response the way most first-contact acquisitions went. A clean signal, clear voice. Someone had taken the time to figure out which frequency the Vorthak fleet was using and had tuned a transmission to it precisely. A human voice said, Ferros Station receiving. This is Administrator Liora Vance. I got your message. I have a few questions. Theron-Mul blinked all 4 of his eyelids in sequence, which is a Vorthak expression of mild surprise. She has questions, he said. Zeltur looked at his panel. Shall I respond, Admiral? Yes, respond. He did. The response that came back from the surface went like this. First question, are you seriously out here in a fleet that big for a mining colony? Second question, do you have any idea what the shipping schedule disruption is going to do to our contracts? Third question, what is your commander's name? I like to know who I'm dealing with. Theron-Mul stared at his communications panel for a long moment. Around him the bridge was very quiet. She sounds, Zeltur said carefully. Calm. She sounds, Theron-Mul agreed slowly. Very calm. This should have been the first warning. It was not recognized as such. I have spent considerable time in the months since the events at Ferros Station trying to compile a comprehensive account of who Liora Vance actually was. This has proved more difficult than expected because the human records are, quite deliberately, incomplete. Humans, I have learned, are very good at making certain people very hard to find on paper. If they want someone to be invisible, that person becomes invisible. Liora Vance, prior to her appointment as administrator of Ferros Station, was either a mid-level logistics coordinator for a human shipping consortium, or she was something else entirely. The records say one thing. Her behavior at Ferros Station says something very, very different. What I was able to confirm, she was 44 years old. She had been at Ferros Station for 6 years. The colonists called her Vance, just Vance, and the way they said it suggested something between deep respect and mild terror, which, for the humans I have subsequently interviewed, appears to be the appropriate response. She was not tall by any standard. The station surveillance footage we recovered later showed a human woman of average height, dark hair cut practically short, wearing a colony administrator's jacket that had seen better decades. She moved like someone who was always thinking 2 steps ahead and found the present moment faintly boring. When she got the Vorrkai fleet's declaration of acquisition, her second-in-command, a large human named Darrow Finn, who had arms like cargo hauler cables and a permanent expression of exhausted readiness, came to find her in the processing bay. She was looking at ore samples. Finn said, "Vance, there's a fleet in orbit. Alien fleet, 50 ships, maybe more. They sent a recording. I think they want the station." Vance held an ore sample up to the light. "How long? How long for what? How long until they decide to get impatient?" Finn checked his wrist panel. "They gave an hour." She put the ore sample down. "Get me Bex and Kip. Get Sao Weller out of the tunnels. Tell everyone on the lower levels to stop what they are doing and start doing something else. Do it quietly. Do not use the main channel." Finn looked at her. He was a man who had seen a number of things in his life and had a well-calibrated sense of when a situation was normal and when it was not. "Are you going to tell me the plan?" "I'm going to respond to our guests first," she said. "Then I will tell you the plan. Vance, Finn, there are 50 ships up there. 18 warships," she said, which meant she had already looked. "The rest are troop transports and support vessels. Warship count is the number that matters." She walked out of the processing bay. Finn stood there for a moment, looking at the ore sample she had left behind. Then he started making calls. Theron-Mul made the decision to speak with Liora Vance directly over live communications, rather than simply issuing a deadline and waiting, which was what protocol suggested. He made this decision because, as he told Zeltur, showing personal authority in the opening exchange tended to accelerate compliance. He was not wrong as a general principle. He was spectacularly wrong in this specific application of it. Vance came on the channel without ceremony. "Administrator Vance," she said. "You are Admiral Theron-Mul," he said. "Admiral Theron-Mul, Legion 7, Vorrkai Dominion. You have received the declaration of acquisition." "I have," she said. "Very thorough document. Lots of clauses. It is standard." "Admiral Theron-Mul, I want to cooperate with you." "I do, but I have 3,000 people here, and most of them are miners, and miners are not soldiers, and I would very much like to get them out of the way before any shooting starts. Can you give me time to manage an evacuation?" Theron-Mul considered this. In the history of the Dominion's acquisitions, most colony administrators asked for time. It was a natural first response. Usually they were stalling. Sometimes they were genuinely trying to protect their population. Either way, granting reasonable time was standard practice. It demonstrated the Dominion's commitment to minimizing unnecessary casualties, which the Council liked to put in the official reports. "You have 24 hours, Theron-Mul said. "At the end of 24 hours, if we do not have confirmation of the station's formal surrender, the landing begins." "That's more than fair," Vance said. "Thank you, Admiral." He noted later that she did not sound grateful. She sounded like someone who had just been told the things she needed to hear. There is a difference, and he recognized it in hindsight. But hindsight has the unfortunate quality of arriving after all the decisions have already been made. The channel closed. Theron-Mul turned to Zeltur. 24 hours. "Evacuation," Zeltur said, making a note. "Miners," Theron-Mul said, with the calm dismissiveness of a man who has faced armies and found this situation wanting by comparison. "They will cause no problems." He had a very peaceful night's sleep. "I am going to describe what happened on the surface during those 24 hours, and I want you to understand that I am working from recovered footage, from interviews with the humans who survived, and from the frankly extraordinary amount of physical evidence the Vorrkai Legion encountered when it landed. This is all reconstructed, but I am confident in the reconstruction, because the evidence was, how do I put this, extremely difficult to misinterpret." Vance gathered her people in the main assembly hall within 40 minutes of closing the channel with Theron-Mul. 3,200 people, miners, engineers, families, children, the colony medic, a tired-looking woman named Pao Su, who had been on Ferros Station for 12 years and had the particular resignation of someone who had long since accepted that things were always going to get interesting eventually. And standing beside Vance, Darrow Finn, Bex Olua, who was 26 and looked younger, Kip Tonar, who was 40 and looked older, and Sao Weller, who had just come out of the mine tunnels and was still covered in iron dust. Vance stood in front of 3,200 people and said the following. She said, "There is a Vorrkai fleet in orbit. 18 warships, 34 support vessels, and approximately 52,000 soldiers waiting to come down and take this station. They gave us 24 hours, and they think we are going to spend that time packing bags." She paused. "We are not going to pack bags," she said. "We are going to make them regret coming here. If any of you want to leave, there are 2 cargo haulers on the eastern pad. Take your families. Take what you need. The haulers leave in 2 hours, and I will not think less of anyone who gets on them." She looked out at the crowd. Nobody moved. She said, "Good, then let me tell you what we are going to do." I have the recording of what she said next. I have listened to it 17 times. Each time I listen to it I feel something that I, a professional military historian, who has documented 31 conquests and has no reason to feel anything approaching alarm about past events that are already over, can only describe as a very specific kind of unease that makes the ridge scales on my neck stand up. The children were sent to the deep interior levels, which were reinforced iron, 300 meters underground. Hao Su went with them. 41 adults who were not fighters in any sense of the word went with them too. The remaining population of Ferros Station spent 24 hours doing things that, had our surveillance drones been watching more carefully instead of simply confirming the general absence of military vessels, we might have recognized as deeply alarming. Kip took the mine's industrial boring equipment, the kind used to cut through solid iron or rock at considerable depth, and did something with it that I am not going to describe in technical detail because this is a historical record, not an engineering manual. Sao Weller went into the mountain and did not come out for 9 hours, and when she did she was smiling in a way that Darrow Finn later described as the smile she makes when she's done something that can't be undone. Bexolua organized 20 groups of 30 people each. None of them were soldiers, they were miners, and they knew every tunnel, every shaft, every service corridor, every pressure vent, and every access point in a mountain range that our landing maps showed as open terrain. Vance herself went to the communications room. She was there for 6 of the 24 hours. When she came out, she had done something to the station's signals array that our fleet's electronic intelligence officers would spend 3 days trying to understand and would ultimately fail to, which contributed meaningfully to everything that followed. At the end of 24 hours, Vance sat in her administrator's chair in the main control room and opened a channel to the Vel Soloth. "Admiral Theron-Mul," she said, "your time is up." On the Vel Soloth, Theron-Mul took that transmission to mean she was ready to surrender. He began the landing sequence. He was going to have a very bad week. The landing was, from a technical standpoint, flawlessly executed. Theron-Mul had not spent 30 years in the Dominion fleet without learning how to put troops on the ground efficiently. 44 troop landers came down in 3 waves, the first wave targeting the flat plains north of the station's mountain range, which was the only significant open terrain available, and which our mapping intelligence indicated was clear, stable ground suitable for large-scale deployment. It was clear and stable, right up until the moment it wasn't. The first wave landed without incident. 20,000 soldiers hit the ground, formed up into their standard approach columns, and began the march toward Ferros Station's outer perimeter. The ground commander for the first wave was Sub-Marshal Vortoth, a solid, experienced officer who had been on 4 prior acquisitions and had a well-developed sense for when things were going normally. Things were going normally for about 11 minutes. At the 11-minute mark, the lead column's forward scouts reported a problem. The problem was that the road on their navigation maps did not appear to match the road that was actually there. The surface map showed a wide, graded access road running straight from the landing zone to the station's outer gate, approximately 4 kilometers. The road that was actually there appeared to run instead directly into the side of a small hill that had not been there when the maps were made. The maps were 11 days old. In 11 days the humans had moved a hill, not a large hill, but a hill. They had simply, casually, rerouted the landscape. Vorthak received this report and sent back the kind of response that sub-marshals send when they are not yet alarmed, but are beginning to consider the possibility of alarm. He ordered the column to route around the hill. Standard procedure. Minor terrain discrepancy. Not unusual in mining environments. The column routed around the hill. They found a second hill that had not been on the map. Vorthak ordered a full terrain scan. The terrain scan came back with results that his scanning officer described as unclear, which was a polite way of saying that the scanners were returning data that did not match any known geological formation pattern, and which, when fed into the navigation system, caused the navigation system to produce an error code that no one on the Vel Soloth's bridge had ever seen before. The error code translated from Navigation Vashon system language into standard Vorthak meant, approximately, I do not know where we are. On the Vel Soloth, Zel-Tur brought this information to Theron-Mul. Admiral, first wave is reporting navigation issues. Terrain doesn't match the maps. Theron-Mul looked up from his landing schedule. Terrain changed. Apparently, sir, mining operations, Theron-Mul said, slowly, they have been moving ore, changed some of the surface formation. He thought about this for a moment. It was logical. It was reasonable. It was almost certainly true, up to a point. The problem was the point beyond which it was true. Tell Vorthak to proceed on visual. Send the second wave. The second wave landed. This brought the total ground force to 35,000 soldiers. 35,000 soldiers standing in an open plain that their maps had consistently incorrect data about, with navigation systems producing error codes, in front of a mountain range that had been extensively modified by people who had spent 41 years learning every single thing about it. The first shots were not fired by the Vorthak. The first shots were not, technically, shots at all. At the 2-hour mark after the first wave landing, Submarshal Vorthak's columns had managed to identify 3 navigable approach routes to the station's outer perimeter. 3 routes, through terrain that kept changing slightly every time a reconnaissance drone came back with updated imagery, as if the ground itself were alive and rearranging things for reasons of its own. Vorthak was a patient man. He documented each change. He updated his maps. He sent his columns forward. The first route went through a narrow passage between 2 ridges. The passage was wide enough for a column of 8 soldiers abreast. It was 300 meters long. At the far end, the scouts reported open ground and a clear line to the station perimeter. The lead element of Column 3 entered the passage at the 2-hour 12-minute mark. 160 soldiers. Vorthak was behind them with the main body, standard formation, nothing unusual. At 2 hours and 14 minutes, the passage disappeared. Not in any dramatic, explosive way. The walls of the passage, which were iron or rock, simply began moving, slowly, quietly, with the unhurried confidence of things that had been precisely engineered to move at exactly that speed. The rocks did not fall. They slid, on what the engineers who reviewed the footage later determined were concealed track systems built into the mountain face itself. The passage narrowed. The column slowed. Then the passage narrowed more. Then it narrowed enough that the column could not proceed. Then the passage closed. Not crushed, not destroyed, just closed. A door, essentially. A very large, very heavy, very slow door made of mountain. 160 soldiers were now inside the mountain. They were not harmed, they were contained, and they had, at this point, no idea what was going to happen next. What happened next was a voice came out of speakers that nobody had noticed were mounted in the rock face, and the voice said, in excellent translated Vorthak, "Welcome to the Greybacks. Please stay where you are. You will be more comfortable that way." The voice was calm. It was a woman's voice. Vorthak received this information and sent it up the command chain in the kind of language that experienced military officers use when they want to convey urgency without technically admitting panic. Theron-Mul received the report on the Vel Soloth's bridge. He read it twice. She trapped a column inside a mountain. Zel-Tur said, apparently, using the mountain. Wait, yes. She moved the mountain. Theron-Mul set the report down. He opened a channel to the surface. Administrator Vance. This is Admiral Theron-Mul. One of my columns has been... He paused, searching for the right word. Contained. Vance's voice came back perfectly clear through the interference that was, it would turn out, also something she had arranged. I know, she said. I would like to discuss this. Of course, she said. I like discussions. Discussions are productive. Before we talk, though, Admiral, I want to point out 2 things. First, your 2nd and 4th columns are currently standing in what used to be the primary drainage channel for the western mine shaft. Second, it rained in the mountains this morning. There was a pause. On the surface, Vorthak received an urgent message from his flank scouts. The message described a sound. The sound was water. A great deal of water. Moving at speed through a channel that had recently been unblocked. The next few minutes were extremely chaotic, and while no soldiers died, approximately 11,000 of them were, briefly, very wet, and then very muddy, and then completely unable to advance on anything because the terrain that had been solid plain was now 8 inches of iron-rich orange mud that Vorthak military boots were not designed to navigate. Theron-Mul, on the Vel Soloth, could see this from orbit. Zel-Tur stood beside him for a long moment. Neither of them said anything. She planned this. Theron-Mul finally said. It was not a question. It appears so, Admiral. Before we landed. Before we got here, Zeltur said quietly. Admiral, I don't think we were given 24 hours for an evacuation. Theron-Mul looked at his second-in-command. He looked back at the view of his 35,000 soldiers standing in orange mud on a planet that was actively working against them. Get me a channel to the third wave, he said. Hold them in orbit. He opened the communications line to the surface again. Vance was still there. She had not moved. She had been waiting. Administrator Vance, Theron-Mul said, with the measured calm of a man who is refusing to accept that this is going as badly as it is going. I have 52,000 soldiers and 18 warships. You have 3,000 people and a mine. I want you to tell me very clearly what you believe the outcome of this situation is going to be. There was a brief pause. Then Vance said, I think that's a really good question, Admiral. I think the honest answer is that you are not going to like it. Another pause. Then she said, but I want to be fair to you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a number. The number is how many of your soldiers are currently in positions that I can do something about. Not all of them. I want to be clear. I am not threatening all of your soldiers, just the ones in those specific positions. Are you ready for the number? Theron-Mul said, slowly. Give me the number. Vance said 31,412. There was a silence on the Velsaloth's bridge that was so complete that Zeltur later described being able to hear the hum of the ship's power systems in a way he had never been aware of before. 31,412 soldiers, out of 35,000 currently on the ground. Nearly 90% of his surface forces, already sitting inside whatever Liora Vance had spent 24 hours building in a mountain range full of iron ore and mine shafts and 41 years of infrastructure. Theron-Mul took a very deliberate breath. He was a professional. He was calm. He said, and the remaining soldiers. The remaining ones, Vance said. And here her voice did something he hadn't expected. It dropped, just slightly, just a fraction, into something that was not quite warm and not quite cold but was absolutely, unmistakably serious, are the ones who are going to walk back to your landing zones. Get back on your ships and go home. I would very much like that to happen. I have not hurt anyone yet. I would prefer to keep it that way. A pause. But Admiral, she said, if you send that third wave down, things are going to get much less comfortable for everyone involved, and I am not going to keep asking. Theron-Mul stood on the bridge of the most powerful warship in Legion 7's fleet, surrounded by officers who were very carefully not looking at him, looking at the image of 35,000 soldiers standing in orange mud while 160 of their colleagues sat inside a mountain. And he made the decision that every commander eventually makes when they realize they have walked into a room that was built around them before they arrived. He did not make the right decision. He sent the third wave. He told himself later that he had no choice, that retreat at this stage would have been a political impossibility, that the Dominion did not retreat from mining colonies populated by 3,000 people, that Liora Vance was bluffing. He was wrong on every count. The third wave landed at hour 3. That was when the second thing happened. The second thing was considerably louder than the first thing. Kip Tanner, who had been inside the mountain for 9 hours during the 24-hour preparation window, had taken the mine's industrial boring equipment and done something quite specific with 12 of the largest shafts in the Greyback Mountain Range's eastern face. He had, in essence, turned them into something that mining engineers would technically classify as linear accelerators. The iron ore that came out of them, in large quantities, at high velocity, in a specific direction, at the moment Vance made a call on a small handheld communicator, was not, technically, ammunition. It was industrial byproduct, released at an unfortunate time, in an unfortunate direction. The third wave's landing zone was on the eastern plain. I am going to let you connect those points yourself. No soldiers died in the initial barrage. Vance had, and I want to be very clear about this because it matters, aimed to disrupt, not to destroy. The ore launched in a widespread pattern that hit the landing zone in the moments between the third wave's troop landers touching down and the soldiers fully disembarking. It hit the landers. It did not hit the soldiers. 12 troop landers were very suddenly not in operational condition. They were also not going back to orbit. They were staying on the ground. The soldiers from those 12 landers were now also on the ground, with no rides home and a very clear view of the smoking eastern face of the Greyback Mountain Range, which had just demonstrated it could throw iron ore at them with considerable precision. The channel from the surface opened again without Theron-Mul having to initiate it. Vance said, Admiral, I asked you not to do that. Theron-Mul said nothing. His hands were very still on the edge of his command console. Vance said, I am going to give you one more opportunity. Your people on the ground are not in danger right now. The people in the mountain are comfortable, I promise. I checked. But this is the last time I am going to make an offer, because my people are tired and they have been working for 20 hours straight, and honestly, Admiral, so have I, and I would very much like to eat something and sleep for 8 hours. She took a breath. Take your fleet and go, she said. Take everyone. We will release the soldiers from the mountain. You can have your landers, the working ones, and the troop transports in orbit. You leave Ferros Station alone. We go back to mining iron, you go back to conquering things that will actually cooperate with you, and nobody writes a history of this that embarrasses your council. She paused. Then she added, very quietly, and Admiral, I know you are looking at your warships right now. I know you are thinking about orbital bombardment. I need you to understand something about iron ore mountains before you do that. She said something else. Theron-Mul went very still. Zeltur, who had been listening, turned to look at the Admiral. He had served under Theron-Mul for 11 years. He had seen the Admiral face 3 species that actively fought back. He had seen Theron-Mul receive casualty reports without expression. He had watched the Admiral conduct negotiations under fire. He had never seen the Admiral's face go the color it went in the next 3 seconds. Theron-Mul turned to his weapons officer. He said, stand down. The weapons officer blinked. Sir? Stand down, Theron-Mul said again. All weapon systems. Passive only. He turned back to the communications panel. He opened the channel. He said, Administrator Vance, what are your terms? And here, at this precise moment, this is where Part 1 ends. Not because the story is over. Because this is where it begins, properly. Because Liora Vance's terms were not what Theron-Mul expected. Because what she said to him about the iron ore mountains, the thing that made his face change color, was something that Legion 7 spent the next 3 weeks discovering the full truth of. And because what happened after he asked for her terms was the moment that a mining colony with 3,000 people stopped being a footnote in Dominion military history and became the reason that, to this day, Vorrkai fleet commanders are required to complete a full 20-hour educational program before entering any human-controlled territory. The program is called What We Did Not Know. It is the longest required course in the Dominion's military curriculum. It is still not long enough. Before I tell you what Liora Vance said to Admiral Theron-Mul that made his face change color, I need to tell you something about iron ore, specifically about what happens to iron ore when it has been sitting inside a mountain for several billion years, and what further happens to it when a team of mining engineers with 41 years of accumulated knowledge and 24 hours of very focused motivation decide to do something creative with it. I am Grax-Vol. I am a historian. I am not an engineer, so the technical explanation I received from our fleet's senior engineering officer, Sub-Commander Theron-Mul, who was brilliant and also deeply shaken by the time she finished her analysis, was delivered to me in terms that she felt a historian could understand. She said, and I am paraphrasing, the mountain was a weapon. The whole mountain, every shaft, every tunnel, every drainage channel, every borehole, every support strut they had placed over 41 years of mining operations. It was all connected. And if someone destroyed the mountain from orbit, the resulting reaction from the ore deposits in combination with the tunnel ventilation system and the water table below would have created an atmospheric event covering approximately 40% of the northern hemisphere. She paused. Then she said, it would have been catastrophic, not for us necessarily, because we would have been in orbit, but for our 35,000 soldiers currently standing on the surface. I said, she told him that? Theron-Mul said, she told him exactly that. She told him the yield estimate. She gave him the specific percentage of atmospheric coverage. She gave him the projected timeline between orbital strike and surface event. She gave him the calculations. I said, she had the calculations ready. Theron-Mul looked at me with the expression of someone who has just spent 72 hours reviewing impossible engineering and has arrived at a conclusion that they did not enjoy. She said, Grax-Vol. Those calculations took me and my entire team 3 days to verify. She delivered them in real time off the top of her head in a sentence and a half. There was a pause. She had been sitting on that mountain for 6 years, Theron-Mul said. She knew every number. She had thought about this already. She had thought about all of it. I said, she was ready for us. Theron-Mul said, she was ready for someone. I don't think it had to be us specifically. That is the part that has stayed with me, in the months since. It did not have to be us specifically. Liora Vance had not built a defense against the Vorrkai Dominion. She had built a defense against the possibility of someone showing up uninvited with overwhelming force, and she had built it out of 41 years of mining infrastructure, iron ore deposits, and the collective knowledge of 3,000 people who had spent their working lives learning exactly what the Greyback mountain range was capable of. She had not needed to know who was coming. She had only needed to know that someone might. This is the thing about humans that our High Council still refuses to properly enter into official threat assessments. They do not plan for specific enemies. They plan for the concept of an enemy. They plan for the idea that something someday will come. And then they go back to mining iron and living their lives, and when the something arrives they already know what to do. I find this deeply unsettling. I suspect you do too. If you do not, again you are not paying attention. Theron-Mul asked for the terms. Vance gave them. I have the full transcript of that conversation. It is remarkable, in the way that watching a very large, very confident animal walk directly into a very small, very patient trap is remarkable. You know what is happening, the animal does not. You cannot decide if you feel worse for the animal or for the person who set the trap, because the person who set the trap has clearly been spending their evenings thinking about this in considerable detail, which is its own kind of burden. Vance said Term 1. Your fleet leaves the Orun-7 system within 6 hours. All of it. The warships, the transports, the support vessels, everything. Theron-Mul said, and my soldiers on the ground? Vance said that is Term 2. Your soldiers on the ground are released in stages. The ones in the mountain come out first. As soon as I have confirmation your fleet is pulling back to the system jump point. The ones in the field can board the troop landers and return to orbit as the fleet withdraws. Orderly, nobody gets left behind. Theron-Mul said, and the soldiers whose landers were destroyed. Vance said, those are also Term 2. We have 2 cargo haulers on the eastern pad. We will fly your soldiers to your operational landers in groups. My pilots will handle it. There was a pause. Theron-Mul said with a kind of stiff incredulity, your pilots will fly my soldiers. My pilots are very good, Vance said. Cargo hauler pilots on iron ore planets are very good pilots. Trust me on that. Another pause. Theron-Mul said, Term 3. Vance said, Term 3 is simple. When you write your report to the Vorrkai Dominion High Council, you write it accurately. You report what happened here. You do not round numbers down. You do not omit the mountain. And you do not describe this engagement as a technical difficulty or a tactical repositioning. You report that Ferros Station resisted, that it was effective, and that Legion 7 withdrew. Silence on the bridge of the Vel Solith. Zeltor has since confirmed, in his own account of events, that this was the moment that hit Theron-Mul hardest. Not the mud, not the trapped column, not the bombardment of the third wave's landing zone. The requirement to tell the truth in an official report to the High Council, because the High Council did not like truth. The High Council liked victories. They liked clean numbers and low casualty counts, and the kind of efficient, impressive acquisition stories that played well in the Dominion's public record. An honest report about Ferros Station was going to be, in political terms, the equivalent of sending the High Council a very expensive box that turned out to contain absolutely nothing pleasant. Theron-Mul said, you want me to tell the Council that a mining colony stopped a legion? Vance said, I want you to tell them the truth, because here is the thing, Admiral. I am not trying to make an enemy of the Vorrkai Dominion. I am trying to save everyone some time. If you go back and lie about what happened here, your council will send someone else. And whoever they send next will have the same experience, except I will have had time to do more work on the mountain, and the outcome will be worse. If you tell the truth, the council will make an informed decision about whether Ferros Station is worth what it costs to take it. She let that sit for a moment. Then she said, it is not worth what it costs to take it. I think you know that. I think you have known it for the last 3 hours. I need your counsel to know it too. Theron-Mul was quiet for a very long time. Long enough that Zeltor thought the channel had dropped. Long enough that the tactical officer on the Vel Solith's bridge had begun, very quietly, very subtly, reviewing the fleet's jump calculations for departure, on the reasonable assumption that the Admiral was going to agree and it was better to be ready. Then Theron-Mul said, Term 3 is acceptable. Vance said, thank you, Admiral. He said, is there a Term 4? She said, there is one more thing. Yes. He said, what is it? She said, when your soldiers come out of the mountain, they are going to have been given water and a meal. My people will have taken care of that. I want you to put in the report that we fed them. There was a pause. That is all, she said. I want it noted that we fed them. Zeltor has told me more than once that this was the moment he knew exactly what kind of person Liora Vance was. Not the mountain, not the calculations, not the ore launchers, or the redirected water table, or the navigation interference. The request to document that she had fed the soldiers who were her prisoners because it was practical. A small colony that had just stopped a legion could not afford to make 52,000 enemies personally. Those soldiers would go home. They would talk. What they said would matter. If they said the humans locked us in a cave, that was one story. If they said the humans locked us in a cave and then gave us food and water and got us home, that was a different story. Vance understood this. She had built it into the terms. She had also, Zeltur noted, genuinely fed them. Both things were true, and both things were deliberate, and neither of them contradicted the other. The fleet began its withdrawal at hour 4. Not 6 as the term specified, but 4, because Theron-Mul was a man who, once he had made a decision, executed it with the same thoroughness he applied to everything else. If he was leaving properly. The warships pulled back in formation. The support vessels followed. The transports held position at the system's outer boundary, waiting for the ground forces to come up. On the surface, the release began. The passage in the mountain opened, not the way it had closed, which had been a slow, deliberate architectural movement, but smoothly, as if it had never closed at all, as if the mountain simply changed its mind about the whole thing. The 160 soldiers of Column 3 walked out into daylight in small groups, emerging from the rock face into the pale orange light of Orun-7's sun, blinking. They had been given water. They had been given something to eat, which several of them later described as being made of iron ore, which it was not. It was a locally produced grain product that happened to be a similar color due to the iron content of the soil. They were not injured. They were by most accounts confused and extremely thoughtful in a way that soldiers often become after being inside a mountain for several hours at the discretion of someone they had significantly underestimated. Darrow Finn met them at the mountain exit. He was a large man with a practical face and arms like cargo hauler cables, and he stood there with a slight nod and said, "Watch your step on the way down. The left side path is solid. Right side is soft ground. You will sink in it." One of the Vorrkai soldiers, a young one who had been in the front of the column and had therefore had the best view of the passage closing around him, looked at Finn for a moment. Then he said, in translated Vorrkai, "How long did you build this?" Finn thought about it. 41 years, he said, give or take. The young soldier looked at the mountain. Then he looked at the station. Then he looked at Finn again. "For what purpose?" he said. "The mining infrastructure." Finn said, "Iron ore, mostly." The young soldier said, "But the other purpose?" Finn looked at him for a moment. "For the possibility," he said. Then he pointed at the left path and walked back to the station without further comment. The other evacuations went smoothly. The cargo haulers ferried soldiers in groups of 200 from the destroyed landers' position to the operational landing zones, 6 trips each. Pilots who navigated the iron dust air of Ferros Station with the relaxed competence of people who did this for a living and found the presence of 52,000 alien soldiers on their planet to be, primarily, a logistical scheduling problem. The mud was still there. Nobody mentioned the mud. By hour 5, all ground forces were back on their ships. By hour 5 and 40 minutes, Legion 7's fleet was at the system jump point. By hour 6, precisely to the minute, the last Vorrkai warship crossed the threshold and was gone. Ferros Station was quiet. Vance came out of the control room at hour 6 and 7 minutes. She had been in there for most of the engagement, which had lasted from first contact to fleet departure, approximately 31 hours. She had not slept. She had eaten one meal, a grain product that was the color of iron ore, at the 14-hour mark. She walked into the station's main assembly area, where approximately 2,000 of the remaining population had gathered, because people in tense situations tend to gather in large groups near people they trust, and Ferros Station's people trusted Vance. She looked at them for a moment. They looked at her. She said, "They are gone." The noise that followed was something that Bexalua, who was 26 and had been awake for 31 hours, and was covered in iron dust, and had spent the night operating the ore launch system from the eastern tunnel with the kind of focused ferocity that very young people produce when they are genuinely frightened and refuse to admit it, later described as the loudest thing she had ever heard in her life, and she had spent 6 years working in a mine. Vance stood in the middle of it and let it happen for about 30 seconds. Then she held up a hand. She said, "The deep levels. Someone go get Pao Su and the children." She said, "Kip, I need a structural assessment on the eastern face by tomorrow morning. The ore launches stress the track systems, and I want to know what we are working with." She said, "Sao, the western shaft drainage channel needs to be rerouted back to original configuration before the next rain or we will have the mud problem permanently." She said, "Finn." Darrow Finn appeared from the back of the crowd, because Darrow Finn had a talent for being exactly where he needed to be and an absolute refusal to make a spectacle of it. "Vance," she said, "the report we filed with the shipping consortium. I need to update the delay estimate on the next ore shipment. Tell them 3 weeks. Finn looked at her. He said, 3 weeks. She said, "The Eastern launch system needs to be decommissioned and rebuilt. We can't use it for mining in its current configuration, and we need to mine Finn because we have contracts." She was, at this point, 31 hours without sleep, having just successfully repelled 52,000 soldiers from a planet with a mine and 23 days of preparation time, and she was updating a shipping delay report. Finn said, very quietly, so that only she could hear, "Vance, are you all right?" She considered this, she said, "Ask me after I sleep." She walked to her office, closed the door, and apparently went to sleep sitting in her chair with her jacket still on, because when Bexoluwa knocked 3 hours later with something that needed signing, she found Vance asleep at her desk with the posture of someone who had decided that the floor was too far away to be worth the effort. Bexoluwa signed the document herself and did not wake her. Theron-Mul kept term 3. I want to say that clearly because it would have been easy not to. It would have been easy to write a report that described a navigation malfunction, a terrain assessment error, a strategic repositioning due to unforeseen geological factors. The Council would have accepted it. The Council wanted to accept it. Nobody in the Dominion's political structure was enthusiastic about the alternative, which was the truth. Theron-Mul wrote the truth. He wrote a report that was, by the standards of Vorrkai military documentation, extraordinary. He described the 24-hour period. He described the navigation interference. He described the terrain modification. He described Column 3 entering the mountain passage. He described the water table release and the mud and the ore launch barrage that grounded 12 troop landers. He described the calculations Vance had delivered about the atmospheric event that would result from orbital bombardment. He put in the exact numbers she had given him, because his engineering team had verified them and found them accurate. He described the terms of withdrawal, all 3 of them. He described, in the final paragraph, the feeding of the prisoners. The report landed in the High Council's review chamber on a morning when Councillor Theron-Mul was, by several accounts, in an excellent mood, having just received positive news about a different expansion effort in the southern sectors. He read the report. He read it again. He called in his senior military advisor, Prakiel, who read it and said nothing for a very long time. Theron-Mul said, 52,000. Prakiel said, yes. Theron-Mul said, against 3,000. Prakiel said, 3,200. Theron-Mul said, and we lost. Prakiel said, we withdrew. Theron-Mul said, is there a difference? Prakiel did not answer that question. It did not have an answer that was going to make anything better. What followed was 6 weeks of internal review, the full results of which are classified at a level I am not permitted to access, though I have my suspicions. What I can confirm is what came out of the review. 3 things. First, Theron-Mul was not disciplined. He was reassigned, but not demoted, and not in a way that suggested punishment. He now commands the Dominion's Northern Border Observation Fleet, which is a long way from anything with a human presence. Whether this is coincidence, I cannot say. Second, the Vorrkai Dominion formally reclassified human-occupied territories from Category 3, minor populations, non-strategic threat level, to Category 1, full assessment required, do not engage without complete intelligence profile. Category 1 had, until that point, been reserved for civilizations with active warship fleets and confirmed weapons of mass destruction capability. A mining colony of 3,000 people now shared a threat category with the Polari Collective, who had 1,700 warships and had once fired a weapon at a star on purpose just to see what would happen. Third, the training program. The 20-hour mandatory educational course for any fleet commander entering human-controlled territory. What we did not know. I have been asked to consult on its content, which is the closest thing to a compliment I am likely to receive from the Council in my career, since my career has recently involved writing this account and the Council is not particularly happy with me for it. The course covers human infrastructure development timelines, the relationship between civilian mining operations and potential defensive applications, human communication and negotiation patterns with particular attention to what is not being said, the 41-year preparation window at Ferros Station as a case study, and a section simply titled The Calculations, which is a full 4 hours dedicated to the atmospheric event scenario and what it means for orbital bombardment decisions in human-occupied territory. The final hour of the course is a recording. It is the recording of Liora Vance's full communications with Theron-Mul during the 31-hour engagement. Every word, every pause, every moment where she gave him information, and the information was true, and he did not fully understand what he was being told until it was too late. Fleet commanders are required to watch it twice. Most of them watch it more times than that. I spoke with Theron-Mul once, 8 months after the events at Ferros Station, in the observation lounge of a transit station in the Dominion's interior sectors. I was compiling this account. He had agreed to speak with me, which surprised me, because most officers in his position would have declined. He sat across from me with a cup of Veth brew, and the particular stillness of someone who has spent 8 months doing a great deal of thinking. I asked him, at what point did he know? He did not ask me what I meant. He said when she gave the number. I said 31,412. He said, yes, because she was right, and she was right to the unit. Not approximately right, exactly right. That meant she had been tracking every movement of every column since the first wave landed, in real time, without our scanners knowing she was doing it. He drank his Veth brew. He said, she knew where every single one of my soldiers was standing, at all times. She knew which ones were in positions she had prepared for and which ones had moved outside those positions by chance. She counted them. He said, 31,412. That number took me until hour 4 to verify with my own sensors. She had it at hour 2. I said, what did you think when she said it? He said, I thought about what I did not know. I said, which was? He said, everything that had happened in that mountain range in 41 years. Every decision, every shaft, every tunnel, every drainage channel, every support structure, every modification to the surface terrain. 41 years of human beings learning a mountain in the kind of detail you only develop when you live somewhere and work somewhere and build somewhere every single day for decades. He put his cup down. I came with maps that were 11 days old. She was working from 41 years of memory. He said, that is not a battle I could have won. I am not sure anyone could have won it. The contest was already over before my fleet arrived. I just did not know the contest had begun. I said, do you regret not turning around when the navigation systems first gave the error code? He looked at me. He said, every day. I did not press further. Some truths do not benefit from being expanded upon. I eventually found the Human Shipping Consortium's employment records for Liora Vance. It took considerable effort, because human records, as I noted earlier, have a tendency to be incomplete in ways that feel very deliberately engineered. What I found was 6 years of Ferros Station administrative reports, all of them competent, some of them remarkable. Before Ferros Station, 8 years at a mining operation in a different human system. Before that, 12 years in a field I will describe only as logistics and infrastructure assessment for high-risk environments, because the specific organization she worked for during that time is one that human records describe as a logistics consultancy, and that 3 separate Vorrkai intelligence officers described to me independently as something else entirely. I asked one of those intelligence officers what he meant. He said, the humans have a term for people who look at a problem from a very long distance, from before the problem exists, and build a solution that will still be working correctly when the problem arrives, regardless of what form the problem takes when it gets there. I said, what is the term? He said, I do not think it translates well. I said, try. He thought about it. He said, the closest equivalent in standard Vorrkai would be something like a builder of unfinished defenses, someone who constructs something that looks like a mine or a road or a building, but which has a second purpose that only activates when it needs to. He said, the humans do not have a military term for it, because they do not classify it as a military activity. They do not consider it strategic preparation. They call it good infrastructure. I have thought about this for a long time. Good infrastructure. 41 years of good infrastructure, on a planet full of iron, tended by a woman who had spent 20 years before that building good infrastructure in high-risk environments, building things that served a daily purpose and a secondary purpose, and waiting, without urgency, without alarm, with the patient certainty of someone who does not need to know who is coming because the preparation works against anyone. The Vorrkai Dominion sent a legion because the planet looked like an easy target. It looked like an easy target because it was a mine, just a mine, iron ore and mountains and 3,000 people living their lives. The Dominion looked at it and saw softness. Vance had spent 6 years looking at it and seeing something to work with. You have been waiting for me to address the title of this account. I am aware of it. They sent a legion. She sent them back in boxes. I used this title deliberately, and I want to explain it before I close, because the accuracy of the metaphor is important to me as a historian. She did not literally send anyone back in a box. Nobody died in the engagement at Ferros Station. Not one Vorrkai soldier, not one Ferros Station resident. The mud was humiliating but not lethal. The mountain passage was confining but not dangerous. The ore barrages hit trooplanders, not troops. The water table release ruined 11,000 pairs of military boots and precisely 0 lives. This was also deliberate. I am certain of it. The atmospheric event calculation she gave Theron-Mul was designed to stop orbital bombardment without actually causing an orbital bombardment. The ore launchers were aimed at machines, not soldiers. The mountain passage was engineered to contain, not to harm. She had built a system that was capable of inflicting considerable damage and had calibrated it by choice to inflict almost none, because she was not trying to win a war. She was trying to end one before it started. The boxes are a metaphor. The boxes are the shapes that Legion 7's pride, Legion 7's confidence, Legion 7's absolute certainty that this was going to be easy fit into when Vance was finished with them. She took 52,000 soldiers and 18 warships and the full weight of the Vorrkai Dominion's expansion apparatus, and she put it in a box. And the box was an honest report filed with the High Council that said, in language that could not be softened or archived or politically adjusted, "We came, we failed. A woman with a mine and 3,000 iron-covered colonists sent us home." That is the box. And it was, for the Vorrkai Dominion, far more damaging than any physical container. Because the report changed things. Not immediately, not cleanly, but over time in the way that truth has a tendency to change things when it is put in writing and cannot be erased. The reclassification of human territories changed things. The training program changed things. The quiet internal acknowledgement in Dominion military planning circles that the standard threat assessment model had a significant gap in it, a gap shaped roughly like a mining colony with 41 years of infrastructure, and a woman who thought in terms of decades changed things. They sent a legion. She sent them back in boxes. The boxes were made of the truth, and truth, as any military historian will tell you, has a structural integrity that iron ore cannot match. I have been asked by several colleagues who read early drafts of this account what I think Liora Vance would say if she knew this record existed. I think about this question more than I am comfortable admitting. I asked Darrow Finn, who agreed to a brief correspondence after considerable persuasion. Finn, who is not a man of many words but chooses the ones he uses with considerable care, sent back a single line. He said, she would say it is accurate. She would say she hopes the right people read it, and she would go back to updating the shipping delay report. I asked if she was still at Ferros Station. He said, yes. I asked if she was still administrator. He said, yes, we had an election. She got every vote except hers. I asked who she voted for. He said, she wrote in the mountain. I have thought about this answer for 3 months. I am still not entirely sure if it is a joke. I have concluded that this does not matter, because whether it is a joke or not, it is also true in the way that only the best jokes manage to be. The mountain, in any reasonable accounting of what happened at Ferros Station, deserves the credit. The mountain, and the 41 years that went into it, and the 3,000 people who built their lives inside it, and the woman who looked at it and saw what it could be. They sent a legion. She was ready. She was always ready. She just had other things to do in the meantime. This account is dedicated to the official archives of the Vorrkai Dominion, filed under Classification 7, cross-referenced under Ferros Station, Human Territory, Orun-7 System, and also filed in a separate copy in my personal records, which the High Council cannot access, because I am a historian, and historians do not let the truth be archived away where no one will read it. The truth about what happened at Ferros Station is simple. 52,000 soldiers were beaten by 3,000 miners, a mountain, and one woman who understood that the best defense is one that does not look like a defense until the moment it needs to be. The Vorrkai Dominion has not returned to Orun-7. Ferros Station ships iron ore on a regular schedule. The eastern mountain face has been rebuilt. The passage in the rock, the one that closed around 160 soldiers of Column 3, has been sealed shut from the inside. Not destroyed, sealed. Available if needed. If someone asks Kip Tanner how long it would take to reopen it, he says 2 hours. If someone asks why they have not simply removed it entirely, he just looks at them. The answer is the same as the answer Darrow Finn gave to the young soldier at the mountain exit 8 months ago, after 31 hours of sustained engagement against a fleet that should have won by every measurable standard and did not, because measurable standards are only as good as the things they have thought to measure. For the possibility, they built it for the possibility. And that is the whole story.